Hello, hello, hello. Now, what can I say? How can I begin? It doesn't require any kind of skit or whatever. It's just a simple, basic question. Why are Mormons so nice? And don't try and tell me Mormons aren't nice. You must have experienced it. You're in a town on your own. You don't know anybody. You're staying there for a conference or something and it hasn't started yet. And there they are. There they are, two Mormons, two young guys dressed rather like this, or even better, two young girls with their badges on, sister so and so and sister so and so, and you know they're going to talk to you, and you know they're going to be very nice people, and they're just going to make you feel better about life. The first time it happened to me, I was in a car park in Lidl in Oulu. And I couldn't find a trolley. I didn't have any, and I found a trolley, but I didn't have any money to put in the trolley because you need to put a coin in the trolley to make it come out of its sort of chain system. And then this Mormon girl clearly a Mormon, turns to me and says, "Oh, have my trolley, and keep the euro. It's fine. And of course, at the end, I then gave it to somebody else, to pass on the love." And that was what got me interested. That and my interest in genealogy what got me interested in Mormonism, as I realised, good heavens, why are these people so nice? It's extraordinary. And I started meeting up with these two. I was known as an investigator, and I started meeting up with these two sisters, these two particular sisters, one from California, the other from Utah, and we became quite good friends. And I would listen to what they were telling me about and the demonstrations they did about the nature of celestial heaven and how the church had been corrupted and all this. And in return, we had a jolly good time. And even once I actually was so interested, I went to Utah. I actually went to Utah with some friends and toured around seeing different Mormon churches, and actually met up with and went to the house of one of these two sisters. Why are Mormons so nice? Well, first of all, we might need to understand a little bit about the history of Mormonism for those of you who aren't particularly familiar with it. I've written it down somewhere. Yes, here we go. So you have a situation basically where Mormonism it starts off. We have Joseph Smith, of course, and Joseph Smith was from upstate New York, and Joseph Smith. In about 1820, he came to the conclusion there was a great awakening going on in upstate New York, and so everybody was converting. There was all these religious preachers from all these different churches in upstate New York all the time, round about this period, in about 1820. And in 1820, Joseph Smith, who was this young guy, declared that all churches had turned away from the gospel. In 1820, and he started to think, what church should I belong to? Should I be Catholic? Should I be Protestant? Should I be Methodist? What should I be? Who knows? And in 1823, he apparently was visited by the angel Moroni, who was a Native American angel, but for some reason was also white-skinned. And the angel Moroni told him that there were these golden plates on which a second testimony to Jesus Christ had been written, because Jesus Christ, after he had come back from the dead, came to America and established a church there among the Native Americans, who were, by the way, white people who were subsequently invaded by the current Native Americans. In 1827, Joseph Smith finally found the golden plates and transcribed, or had transcribed, the Book of Mormon, apparently. In 1830, he published the Book of Mormon. And very quickly, the charisma of Joseph Smith, it must have been incredible considering what he was saying. He was saying that he was a prophet. It just took off. He managed to establish this church into the 1830s. They went to Ohio. They were driven out of Ohio, this growing band of thousands of Mormons. They went to Missouri and took over a particular town in Missouri. This caused huge fights with the locals, so they were driven out of there. Then they went to a place called Navajo in Illinois and basically took over that town, and Joseph Smith was the mayor, and so on. And then Joseph Smith, even though he had all this stuff in the Book of Mormon, he continued having visions and continued having revelations, and these were written down in the so-called words of wisdom, which were a kind of hadith, if you like, of Mormonism. And this hadith, he'd say things like, "Oh, God has revealed to me that we have to have multiple wives. God has revealed to me that I have to have your wife," that kind of thing. This led to a split with a particular Mormon who'd been born in the UK declaring that Joseph Smith had become a false prophet. The Book of Mormon was real, but he'd become a false prophet, and he established his own church called something like the Church of Christ or something. He set up a newspaper which was critical of Joseph Smith called the Navajo Expositor. Smith banned the newspaper. Smith ended up being put in prison, and then he was killed. And then the church was taken over by Brigham Young, and Brigham Young, who was the kind of St. Paul of Mormonism, took the Mormons on a trip, on a massive trip across to Utah. So it's a quite fascinating thing. They established Utah. Smith, Young, because he was the first person to. It was by then it was kind of disputed Mexican American territory. It was Indian territory, and so because he'd gone there, they made him the governor of Utah. He was set up as he took over in 1847, and he was taken over as the governor of Utah, and he ran Utah for about 10 years until he was kind of removed in a sort of coup. And then the Mormon church just grew and grew and grew, and at the moment, at the time of writing, it's something like 60%, I think it is, of people that live in Utah are Mormon, and in other states as well. There's lots of Mormons in Idaho and places like this, and it's a very, very fast-growing religion. But one of the things that people always notice about Mormonism is that the people are so nice. They come across as so nice, and I wondered, what is it? Why would they be? Are they so nice? And what is it that would make them so nice? Why are Mormons such nice people? Well, first of all, it seems that they would be expected to be very high in the personality trait openness. People who are high in openness tend to be trusting. They tend to be, well, in particular, they tend to be easily hypnotized, and they tend to be open to very unusual kind of ideas. And they are, so this is the first thing. Now, Mormonism, a lot of people don't know this, but in its early stages, even when Smith was alive, Mormonism was highly evangelical, and it sent lots and lots of missionaries over to the UK, to Wales and Ireland and Scotland and all kinds of port cities to convert people to Mormonism. And there was actually a point where there were considerably more Mormons in the UK than there were in America. Now, there was one particular preacher called Dan Jones in Wales, and people simply followed him. He had this amazing charismatic power, and people just wanted to fall under his spell. They were high, very high in openness. Now, there was an interesting paper on this subject by someone called Anne Knudsen, or Knudsen, however you pronounce it, which looked at this period of emigration between 1850 and 1920, this massive period of emigration where millions of people left Europe for America. She concentrates on Scandinavia, but you can look elsewhere at other possibilities. Now, one of the things that seems to predict emigration is openness. People that are higher in openness are more inclined to migrate, and people who are Mormons are migrators who have then migrated to a great extent. Not only will they have often migrated to America in the first place, from England, for example, in the 1840s, there was this massive migration of English Mormons to America. But secondly, once they got there, once they got to somewhere like Illinois or wherever it was, they were then prepared under Brigham Young to migrate again, because Brigham Young declared that Utah, Salt Lake City, was the new Zion, was the new home of Christ or whatever, and they should all migrate there. And they migrated in quite appalling conditions across winter and whatever into Utah. So these are people that are really into migrating. They're really open to new things. They're very, very high in openness. And this would perhaps help to explain one of the things that's said that relates to openness is hypnotizability, and therefore to a certain degree trust, to a certain degree obeying authority, that kind of thing. And there's an element to which being trusting and thinking that other people are trusting is a part of being a nice person. So openness. The second thing that tends to predict migration is extroversion. So people that are prepared to take risks, but also people who feel positive feelings strongly. This is what people who feel positive feelings strongly are prepared to take risks, and they take that risk in order to achieve the payoff. If you feel the positive feeling of food or whatever it is strongly, you'll probably eat more food, which is one of the reasons why extroverts tend to get fat and they have a lower life expectancy. But extroverts, they feel positive feelings strongly. They're amiable, clubbable people. And those would have been the kind of people that would have migrated from the Mormons within the UK, let's say, would have migrated and then would have been inclined to migrate again to Utah. So they'll come across as nice people, they'll come across as fun, even if they're not actually nice, they'll come across as friendly, engaging sort of people, which Mormons do, because they'll be high in extroversion as predicted by their ancestor tendency to migrate. And it has to be remembered that these traits are somewhere in the region of at least 50% heritable, if not perhaps as much as 70%. So we've got so far then people who are high in openness and thus trusting and kind of on a certain level, hypnotizable and sort of in that way kind. And secondly, we have these people who are extrovert. The third issue is the nature of religiousness. So who ends up being religious? Well, it's people who are high in agreeableness and high in conscientiousness. Agreeableness is about empathy, about being kind to people, about wanting to be nice to people. That is the nature of religious people. There is a clear correlation. Religious people are more nice, and Mormons are particularly religious. There was a survey in, I think, about 2009 in the USA, which asked people how religious they were, and of the Mormons, it was the highest category that stated they were very religious indeed, which is interesting because you would think that if you lived with other religious people, then you might not think that you were that religious. You'd think that you'd be comparing yourself to other people you know. So if you're a Mormon, you're going to be with these religious people anyway, so you wouldn't think of yourself as that religious. But even so, when told what very religious meant, it was the most Mormons of all of these categories that said they were very religious. The most people in Utah said they were very religious. 61%. I think it was exceeded only by Mississippi. So they're very religious, and this would predict being high in agreeableness. So again, a nice person. Now you then have to ask who leaves, and this is quite interesting because a lot of people are leaving Mormonism. In 2007, 70% of people who were Mormon in the USA had been born Mormon. By 2014, it was 64%. Among older people, of Mormons, 86% of them say they absolutely believe in God. Among Mormon millennials, it's 68%. 67% of older Mormons say that Joseph Smith was really a prophet, compared to 51% of millennial Mormons. 92% of older Mormons say they are confident in the future of the church, compared to 62% of millennial Mormons. There are many other examples of this. Utah currently it was 75% Mormon in the year 2000. It's now gone down to about 60% Mormon, and among millennials it seems it's going to be about 44% Mormon, so it will lose its Mormon majority. In terms of attitudes to homosexuality, 58% of older Mormons think that it's absolutely impossible for a person to be a Mormon and be gay, compared to 40% of younger Mormons. So Mormons are kind of coming less religious. People are leaving the Mormon church, and they may well be leaving the Mormon church because of the degree to which the internet allows them to find out things about the Mormon church, allows them to be, it stops them from being closeted in this little community where they can't find out anything about the nature of their church and the nature of Joseph Smith and all of the negative things about him that you can find elsewhere if you look. There's no point in me going into them, that he was basically a bit of a mountebank. You can't, these things are suddenly brought to their attention. It is much more difficult with the internet and with all of this media to cut the Mormons to be cut off, and so you can see how they're more likely to start doubting things. And so Mormonism is in that sense streaming away. And so what you would think is that this raises the question of who stays and who goes. Well, we have interesting data on this. So there was a paper which demonstrated that those who leave, those who stay in religious groups in which they're born, they are high in social competence. In other words, they are high in agreeableness. Those who convert to other religious groups, those who have a conversion experience and become religious, they are lower in agreeableness than those who are born into the religious group. So those who are born, there's a degree to which it's genetic. Those who are born into it will be very high in agreeableness because they've never even had ancestors recently who weren't religious. Those who aren't from Mormonism or some other religion and convert into it, they are relatively high in agreeableness, but they're lower in agreeableness than those who are born into it. Those who are the lowest of all in agreeableness are those who are apostates. They are lower in agreeableness even than those who convert. They are the lowest in agreeableness of all. So it means that those who are coming into Mormonism are going to be relatively high in agreeableness, though perhaps not as high as those who are born into it, but those who are leaving are going to be low. They're going to be low in agreeableness. In other words, nasty people leave. Every generation, just by genetic chance, some Mormons will be born and they'll be not very nice people. And those people are going to leave Mormonism. So this will again elevate the degree to which Mormons are nice people. Then we have to look at who has children. Now, for a long time, there was a lot of pressure among the Mormons, really until the 70s, to not use contraception at all. And to a certain degree, that pressure remains. There are these ideas in Mormon theology and Mormon teaching that you should have as many children as you can possibly afford. It's God's will for you to have massive families. Mormons are very family oriented, and in that way you can see why the religion would have been adaptive, because it would have meant that Mormons and the genes associated with being a Mormon would have spread throughout the country. So who has lots of kids? Well, in a context in which there is contraception, in which contraception is increasingly allowed, then we have data on this. My colleague Michael Woodley has done a paper on it. It's called Slow and Steady Wins the Race. It is K strategists who breed. So what we've discussed before, what R and K strategy is. R strategy is that you're evolved to an unstable ecology, you live fast and die young, you invest energy in copulation rather than in nurture in the hope that some of your offspring survive. K strategy, that the ecology becomes more stable and more harsh, you're competing against other members of your ecology. In order to do this, you take energy away from copulation and towards a small number of children, basically a small number of offspring, and you invest energy in those offspring. That's the system. Mormonism is quite interesting because it takes these aspects of both. As a religion, it strongly promotes aspects of K strategy, but you have massive families and traditionally you're polygamous. It's quite interesting. Now, if you look at the way that this works with K strategy, that one of the ways that once energy is invested in nurture, of course, to be better at nurture, you have to be higher in agreeableness, you have to be a nicer person. And once you then end up with groups that are competing with other groups, then the group that is more internally cooperative and externally hostile, we know from computer models, is the one that's more likely to survive. And so this is going to select for people who are basically increasingly nice, i.e. K strategists. So these people that are these K strategists, that have these K strategy traits, in modern environments, those are the people that have children. Because those who don't want to have children are strategists. Those people, they don't want to nurture. They just want to have sex. They want to have sex, but not nurture. They hate nurturing. And it's brilliant because contraception means they don't have to do that. Contraception means they can have all the sex they want and they don't have to have children. They don't have to nurture. So those that do have children are those that have them by accident because they have low IQ, or they can't use contraception properly, or those who actually want to have children. And it's interesting that the religious people, who tend to be on average more K strategy than non-religious people, have high fertility. Of course, the non-religious people, Mormons, have high fertility. So within this, it means that the new laxity within Mormonism that allows them to use contraception is going to make them more nice. It's going to mean that the more unpleasant Mormons don't have so many children, and the nicer Mormons have more children, which will again elevate the level of agreeableness, the level of niceness among the Mormons. Another factor that you have within the Mormon church is the correlation between education level and fertility. You don't get this in other organizations. Normally, the more educated a person is, the fewer children they tend to have. In Mormonism, this is reversed. And it seems that the reason for this is that Mormonism is quite clear. It preaches that you need to be self-sufficient. It preaches that you shouldn't rely on anybody else. It preaches that you shouldn't rely on the community. And so if you are genuinely a believing Mormon, then you will only have as many children as you can afford. If you're more educated, you're probably on average going to be in America wealthier, and so consequently you'll be able to afford more children. You'll want to have more children because God is telling you to have more children, and it's considered a blessing from God, and it's considered the way to go to have as many kids as you possibly can. So you'll have more children, and so you have this relationship between education and fertility. Now, what predicts education level? Well, one of those things is intelligence. It's IQ. IQ predicts education level at about 0.5, something like that, overall education level. Another predictor, it's actually a slightly higher predictor, 0.55 or 0.6, is conscientiousness. So having self-control, being the kind of person that doesn't lose their temper and whatever, basically to a degree being a nice person. So it can be argued that the whole system, again, will elevate niceness among Mormons. The less nice people, as long as they are accepting of the religion and do as the religion dictates, will have fewer children. Good. Next, there's so many of these reasons. I find it quite fascinating. Another issue is simply consanguinity. Consanguinity. So people who marry people who are genetically similar to them. We've discussed this before as well. People who will marry those who are similar to them. People tend to sexually select for people that are genetically similar to them. On average, the equivalent of something like a third cousin. What this means is that they are similar in physically, of course. They're passing on more of their genes than they otherwise would. That's why they do it. But they're also psychologically very similar. If you consider that 88% of the genome is the brain, if you consider the high, and we've got data on the high heritability of these different personality traits, and it's on these that people that marry tend to be more similar. So what this means is if they follow that strategy, they'll tend to get on very well. In a situation in which you've got to marry a Mormon, then of course it severely limits who you can marry. And so you're more likely to get people marrying who are relatively closely related. Consequently, they'll be genetically very similar. Consequently, they'll create very strong bonds with each other. The level of love will be higher. There's data on this from Iceland that fertility is higher among people who are... There's a sweet spot, which is third cousin, and fertility is higher and divorce is less likely, and this kind of thing. And so you'll end up with these very, very strong bonds, these people who get on really, really well, these really strong marriages. Now, what this will give people at the environmental level of personality is a very safe background, a background where everything's going to be okay, a background where you can trust, a background of love, a background that sets you up for a slow life history strategy, that sets you up to trust people and be kind and basically just be a nice person at the environmental level. It sets you up for that. So you can see how that would work. You would also expect them to be less trusting of outsiders because of that, because there'd be more genetic difference between the Mormons and the non-Mormons. But I mean, I'll look at that in a minute. But it would mean they'd have enough self-control, of course, in the interests of proselytizing, to control their emotions towards those people. But there would perhaps be a level in which they wouldn't trust them so much. But I'll look at that in a minute. But that would also, that environmental factor would elevate the niceness of Mormons. There is a lot of Mormon information out there, if you Google it, telling you how bad porn is, and that you shouldn't use porn, and that it's understandable for a woman to be terribly upset if she discovers her husband has used porn. So they're very much guilt-tripped to not use porn. Which would select out people that had a problem with that. So there's these strictures as well and that takes me on to my next point, which is the degree to which you have to conform. So if you're a Mormon, it's very, very difficult. It's extremely countercultural in America or anywhere else to be a Mormon. You're not allowed to drink alcohol. You're not allowed to drink coffee. You're not allowed to drink tea. You're not allowed to have sex before marriage. And there's just so many other strictures on what you're expected to tithe. You're expected to give huge amounts of time over to the church. There's lots and lots of social pressure to be extremely cooperative indeed. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, this will, of course, select out heavily people who are not, particularly high in conscientiousness or agreeableness. You would imagine that they simply wouldn't be able to cope with it. They would become Jack Mormons, which is to say Mormons that are brought up in it, but they don't tithe and they don't keep to the rules of the church, and so they're not allowed to enter the temple, because Mormons have these temples that you can get married in and things, but you're only allowed to go there with a temple recommend, which you can only get if you're considered a Mormon in good standing. So that would select out these people. It would just remove them. So again, it would elevate the degree to which Mormons are these very nice people, because you have this signalling-based religion. There was some research by a scholar called Nicholas Rawls from Canada, which found some evidence that Mormons can kind of people and Mormons as well can identify other Mormons just from the face at a degree to which it would be impossible by chance. Now, part of this could be genetic similarity. As I said, Utah is the most English state in the Union. 40% of people, I believe I'm right in saying, in Utah, English ancestry. It's the most English state in America, and there'd be genetic signals of that, and perhaps people would be able to kind of identify it. But another factor apparently was the quality of the skin. Mormons seem to have nicer skin than non-Mormons, healthier skin than non-Mormons, and so there's a degree to which you can't really fake it. If you drink coffee and drink alcohol in private, people will kind of unconsciously know it, and you will be kind of treated accordingly. So again, this helps to explain, push out people who weren't high in agreeableness. Another issue is the issue of what's called group selection. We've discussed before, you have individual selection, you pass on your genes individually. Kin selection, you pass on your genes by helping your kin. Group selection, the extended kinship group, you pass on your genes by helping really your ethnic group or your group of some other kind that are genetically, of which are a genetic component. Now, the group which is more likely to survive is the group that is high in cooperation and impulse control, positive ethnocentrism, high in that, but also high in negative ethnocentrism, because it would therefore be inclined to attack lethally those who would attack it. Now, this is quite interesting, because if you look at the way that Mormonism has operated, they were under a great deal of pressure when they began. They migrated under Brigham Young to Utah, and through the winter and whatever, and lots of them died. When they got there in the early about 1850, there was this terrible, there was these years of starvation, absolutely terrible, just starvation, people unable, just dying and whatever. And so all of this would have been, fighting, all of this would have selected in favour of a group that was relatively high in, in internal cooperation, and this sort of thing. 1846, 1847, Brigham Young becomes in charge, and they make this migration to Utah around about 1848. Now, the pressure that the Mormons were under by 1850 was such that there was a so-called Mormon Reformation, in which it was revealed that you have to have polygamy in order to be a good Mormon, and you should have as many wives as possible, and all this kind of thing. So there was this pressure they were under, and it eventually resulted in the so-called Mormon War. The Mormon Wars, in which basically the American government decided that they didn't like the fact that Mormons practiced polygamy. They weren't particularly up for that, and so they decided to invade the territory that the Mormons had occupied and that Brigham Young was declared the governor of. They wanted to do something about it. They didn't like all of these. Brigham Young had 55 wives and this sort of thing, and they didn't particularly like that. And so in they went. Now, at that time, as I say, you have this religious fervour. You have this guy called Jebediah Grant, I think his name was, who set up this he was called Brigham Young's sledgehammer, who set up this Mormon Reformation, where everyone had to be much more fundamentalist in their Mormonism. They set up a group called the Danites to control Mormon behaviour, to make sure they conformed and basically beat up people or something like this who didn't conform. And then you have this problem that the president of America wasn't happy about what was going on in Utah. Philippe, his name was, and so he sent in the army to try and sort of take over the state basically and make them conform to the law on anti-bigamy laws. The result of this, as I say, was this Utah war. And the soldiers, Brigham Young declared martial law. He blocked in the American soldiers. They couldn't get any food, and they were at risk of starving. Then during this, there was a gold rush, and this is in 1857, I think it was. There was a gold rush, and these people from Arkansas came through to get to California. The Mormon soldiers regarded them as a threat. And so, over a period of 5 days, even though they surrendered, they massacred them and spared, I believe I'm right, they massacred 140 people, and they spared 17 people who were children younger than 7, and these were adopted by Mormon families. Now, that's interesting in terms of group selection, because it shows you that the Mormons are high in positive ethnocentrism, but they're also high in negative ethnocentrism. In much the same way that the Japanese come across as very, very nice people, very kind people, a bit suspicious of change, a bit suspicious of foreigners, but they'll be very nice to you. They'll be very nice to you. But if you trigger them, if you trigger a highly K-selected people like that, you trigger them to think that they're under threat, then they will go for you. And you see this in the way that the Japanese treated enemy soldiers during World War II. Well, you equally see this in the way that the Mormons are prepared to treat what they see as enemy soldiers in this particular massacre at whatever the place was called, something Meadows, Mount Meadows. So this is what you see, a highly ethnocentric group which will have selected, as I say, in general in favour of being nice. But these people that are very nice, very positive ethnocentric, can be triggered to negative ethnocentrism very strongly if the circumstances are right. And you see this with fundamentalist Mormons. When I was in America, in Utah, I met up with went to a polygamous Mormon church called the Apostolic, it's called the something Apostolic Church or something like this. And they were extremely nice people. I mean, they couldn't have been nicer, kinder, more welcoming. They were suspicious at first. They couldn't have been nicer, kinder, more welcoming people, but I'm sure if I triggered them, then I could get into serious trouble. Equally, we went to a place called Colorado City on the Utah-Arizona border, which is run by the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is an even more strict sect in which the women have to wear prairie dresses and things like this. And the leader, Warren Jeffs, is in jail for multiple accounts of rape. And my friends who I was with, they were very, very concerned about this. This American friend of mine, there was a cafe there called the Merry Wives, and they didn't want to go in. And I went in and got chatting to people, suspicious at first, but eventually extremely friendly. But I'm sure if I made them feel threatened, I'd be in very, very serious trouble, because that's the way that these kind of groups work. But it does mean that they will potentially come across, as I say, as very nice, as very friendly. That is what being highly group selected has achieved for the Mormons. These people are genetically quite similar. In 1837, the Mormons went to Liverpool, and by 1850s there were 30,477 English Mormons, which was more than there were Americans. So they're genetically quite similar, they have genetic interests, and they operate accordingly. The final issue is polygamy. And what would polygamy have done? The Mormons were polygamous until 1890, when their prophet, they have a system of hereditary prophets going down from Joseph Smith. When the prophet dies, the new one is installed, and he's believed to be a prophet. And a particular prophet of theirs declared in 1890 that they were no longer polygamous. A previous prophet, called John Taylor, had declared, though it's disputed, that he'd had a new revelation saying that they should be polygamous. And in the wake of this new prophet in 1890 saying they shouldn't be, there were various splits, the fundamentalist Mormons, the apostolic Mormons, and whatever, which exists today. But what polygamy would have done with someone like Brigham Young having 55 wives is it would have very, very much selected in favour of the qualities that make you have high social status, because women will tend to sexually select for males who have high social status, because if they do that, then their children are more likely to survive because they'll have access to wealth and resources and so on. So women are selected to sexually select for status in men in a way that men aren't. They tend to sexually select for youth and beauty and whatever. So someone like Brigham Young, 55 wives, what would he have been? He would have been a highly intelligent man, because that predicts high social status, but he also probably would have been high in general factor of personality to a certain degree, i.e. agreeableness and conscientiousness, because this helps to get you social status, and indeed women are sexually attracted to these personality traits in men. So what this would have done is it would have selected out very heavily Mormons that were low in intelligence and low in general factor of personality, and it would have elevated the superficial, at least, niceness of Mormons. So, that's about it, really. These are all the reasons why Mormons are just so unbelievably nice. And I wanted to do something on nice people this week, because as you know, if you've been following my videos, I had a video taken down by some very, 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 very unnice people who I'm sure wouldn't be even remotely religious, let alone Mormon. They would be the kind of mutants who aren't religious. And so I thought I'd focus on the nice, focus on the kind this week, and that's what I've done. So that's my theory anyway, on why my multiple strings of theory on why it is that Mormons are so nice. And there is actually some indirect evidence. You can't really measure it very easily because people compare themselves to other people they know and all this. Utah is number 46 in American states in terms of obesity. Now, part of this could be because they follow these rules of clean living and whatever, but if you think that they didn't drink alcohol, they could get quite fat quite easily, because that could be their thing. And they do eat a lot of ice cream, Mormon desserts. When I was there, they're really into them. Could just be they have good impulse control. That's why they're not fat. So that would be consistent with that hypothesis. But anyway, so that's why I think they're so nice. Now, I hope this is a bit of interest, and if you have any, I'd like to thank the person that suggested this. I won't name him, but I'd like to thank him for his idea. It was a Mormon that contacted me. Thank you very much. And if you like this, then please do feel free to PayPal me some some Mormon money, or and you will get blessings in the celestial kingdom hereafter. And feel free to on Subscribestar and on Patreon, and so on, and do get in touch. And goodbye. And wow, that is just awesome. It's been totally awesome. Let me give you a copy of the Book of Mormon. Do read a copy of the Book of Mormon. It's awesome. It's totally awesome. And goodbye.